Standing in the shadow of an ancient Greek temple, the first thing that strikes you isn't just the towering columns or the intricate carvings. It's the overwhelming sense that these structures are whispering secrets across thousands of years. These temples weren't just places of worship, they were carefully coded masterpieces designed to convey hidden messages through every curve, every symbol, every carefully placed stone. What if I told you that the Parthenon's flawless symmetry isn't just an aesthetic choice, but a mathematical cipher? Or that the seemingly random patterns in the Temple of Apollo's mosaics might actually be a celestial map waiting to be decoded? The truth is, the ancient Greeks embedded layers of meaning into their sacred spaces, meanings that go far beyond mythology and into the realms of advanced science, sacred geometry, and even political propaganda. Think about this: when you walk through the ruins of Delphi or Olympia, you're not just stepping over old stones, you're treading across a hidden language, one where the placement of a statue, the angle of a staircase, or the alignment of a doorway could reveal everything from astronomical events to secret cult rituals. These temples were built by a civilization that saw the divine in numbers, the cosmos in architecture, and power in symbolism. And yet, so many of these clues have been overlooked, dismissed as mere decoration. But what if we've been missing the real story all along? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. From the eerie precision of the Temple of Hephaestus's dimensions to the cryptic inscriptions hidden in plain sight at the Temple of Artemis, we're diving deep into 25 of the most astonishing hidden meanings tucked away in these ancient wonders. Some of these secrets were meant to be found subtle nods to the gods or tributes to long-forgotten heroes. Others, they were deliberately concealed, known only to the elite, the initiated, or perhaps even lost to time itself. So if you've ever wondered what these temples are really trying to tell us, get ready, because the answers are more mind-blowing than you could imagine. Take the Parthenon's famous columns. At first glance, they appear perfectly straight, rising with majestic symmetry toward the sky. But look closer. Each one actually curves slightly outward, an intentional design choice called trances. This subtle bulge isn't just an architectural flourish. It's a calculated optical illusion, correcting the human eye's tendency to perceive straight lines as concave from a distance. And that's just the beginning. Every inch of the Parthenon obeys a sacred code of proportions, meticulously calculated using the golden ratio, that magical number, roughly 1.618, found everywhere from seashells to galaxies. Why would the ancient Greeks go to such lengths? Because to them, mathematics wasn't just a tool, it was divine. The golden ratio represented perfect harmony, a bridge between the earthly and the celestial. By embedding it into Athena's temple, they weren't just honoring a goddess of wisdom. They were encoding their belief that the universe itself operates on mathematical principles. Even the spacing between columns follows this ratio, creating a rhythm so precise that modern architects still study it today. But here's the real mystery: constructing something this flawless without computers or laser measurements would be nearly impossible even now. So how did they do it? Some scholars believe the temple's architects were initiates of secret mathematical cults, guarding esoteric knowledge passed down from Pythagoras himself. Others argue the design mirrors the proportions of the human body, reflecting the Greek ideal that humanity, like their gods, is part of a grand cosmic order. Whatever the truth, one thing's clear: the Parthenon isn't just a building. It's a stone and marble manifesto proclaiming that beauty, divinity, and numbers are inseparable. Now let's journey to Delphi, the so-called center of the ancient world where the Temple of Apollo housed history's most famous oracle. The Pythia, the priestess who delivered cryptic prophecies, wasn't just chosen for her piety. Modern science suggests her trances might have had a startlingly physical explanation. Beneath the temple lies a geological fissure, one that leaks ethylene gas, a substance known to induce euphoria, hallucinations, and even altered states of consciousness. Picture this: as the Pythia inhaled these vapors, her mind slipped into a dreamlike haze, her words becoming the scrambled echoes of the gods. But the Greeks didn't see it as mere intoxication. To them, the very earth was speaking. The cracks in the rock weren't just cracks, they were gateways to the divine, proof that the gods channeled wisdom through the land itself. This wasn't superstition, it was sacred science. The temple's architects deliberately built over this fissure, turning a natural phenomenon into a tool of revelation. Even the name Pythia nods to Python, the mythical serpent Apollo slew there, weaving geology into legend. What's truly fascinating is how this gas theory aligns with ancient accounts. Historians like Plutarch describe the Pythia's trances as violent, her voice shifting unnaturally, details eerily consistent with ethylene exposure, and Delphi wasn't unique. Other oracular sites, like the Cave of the Sibyl in Italy, also perched atop toxic fumes, hinting at a hidden network of sacred intoxication spots across the ancient world. Yet the Greeks didn't dismiss these prophecies as drug-induced babble. They trusted the Pythia precisely because her words emerged from the earth's breath, a collaboration between human and nature they believed the gods orchestrated. It wasn't deception, it was divinity distilled through geology. So the next time you hear about the Oracle of Delphi, remember, her visions might have bubbled up from the rocks themselves, a reminder that for the ancient Greeks, the line between the natural and the supernatural was as thin as a wisp of gas. The Temple of Apollo at Didyma doesn't just invite worshippers inside, it sends them on a journey. Unlike most Greek temples where the inner sanctum was a straightforward hall, this sacred space twisted and turned like a labyrinth, forcing visitors to navigate a maze of walls, ramps, and dark passages before they could reach the oracle. Why design a temple to be so deliberately disorienting? Because the ancient Greeks understood something profound. Wisdom isn't handed to you freely. It's earned through struggle, through the act of seeking. Picture yourself as an initiate stepping into the Adyton, the temple's innermost chamber. Instead of walking straight toward the priestess, you'd find yourself descending a narrow staircase into shadows, then climbing back up, winding through corridors so dimly lit you'd lose all sense of direction. Some pathways led to dead ends, forcing you to retrace your steps, frustrating, yes, but intentional. Every twist mirrored the mental maze of doubt and revelation that seekers faced when consulting Apollo, the god of prophecy. By the time you finally reached the oracle, you weren't just physically prepared. You were psychologically primed, your mind stripped of arrogance, open to the god's cryptic guidance. This wasn't just architectural theatrics. The labyrinth echoed ancient initiation rites where physical trials symbolized the shedding of ignorance. Even the temple's name hints at this. Didyma means twin, referencing not just the mythical twins Apollo and Artemis, but the duality of human understanding, the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknowable. The maze forced worshippers to confront that duality, to accept that truth often hides in the turns we least expect. And here's the fascinating twist. Modern archaeologists have found that the temple's layout aligns with celestial patterns. Certain corridors frame the sunrise on specific dates, while others point to constellations sacred to Apollo. So the maze wasn't just a spiritual metaphor, it was a cosmic map, merging the journey of the body with the movement of the heavens. To walk those passages was to trace the paths of the stars themselves, a reminder that divine wisdom isn't just found, it's followed one deliberate step at a time. What's even more striking, the oracles here didn't just deliver prophecies, they often responded in riddles, forcing seekers to unravel layers of meaning, just as they'd unraveled the temple's physical path. The labyrinth wasn't a barrier, it was a teacher, and its lesson was clear. The answers you seek are never at the entrance. They're waiting where the light is dimmest, where the way forward feels most uncertain. Apollo's wisdom, like his temple, demanded you lose your way before you could truly find it. The Erechtheion stands out like a deliberate rebellion against the Greeks' own love of symmetry. While most temples followed strict geometric harmony, this one sprawls unevenly with mismatched columns, staggered levels, and rooms jutting out at odd angles. At first glance, it looks chaotic until you realize every floor was a calculated nod to the gods who called this sacred ground home. Step inside, and you're not just entering a temple, you're walking into a three-dimensional tapestry of myth. The western porch, with its iconic caryatid statues, bows slightly under the imagined weight of the ceiling, as if the marble maidens are truly bearing the roof's burden. But look east, and the columns suddenly shift in height and thickness. Why? Because this half of the temple belonged to Athena, while the other half honored Poseidon, two deities locked in an eternal rivalry. Legends say they once battled here for control of Athens, with Poseidon striking the Acropolis rock with his trident to unleash a salty spring, while Athena gifted the city an olive tree. The Erechtheion's jagged layout mirrors that clash. Its floor even dips around the Poseidon strike mark, preserving the god's fury in stone, and beneath the uneven floors, a hidden chamber dedicated to Erechtheus, the mythical king whose bloodline tied Athens to the divine. His shadowy presence forced architects to twist the temple into knots, weaving mortal and immortal stories into one sacred space. What's genius is how the Greeks turned architectural imperfections into storytelling tools. The caryatids aren't just supports, their strained poses echo Athenian maidens sacrificed to save the city. The disjointed rooms, they force worshippers to move unpredictably, retracing the steps of ancient rituals. Even the temple's orientation breaks tradition, facing the olive tree Athena planted rather than the sunrise. This wasn't careless design, it was reverence in three dimensions. While the Parthenon celebrated mathematical perfection, the Erechtheion embraced divine chaos, proving that sometimes the most sacred spaces aren't those that follow the rules, but those that hold every fracture of the gods' tangled histories. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus wasn't just a monument, it was a celestial timekeeper, its very foundations aligned to the dance of the heavens. While most temples faced east for the rising sun, this wonder of the ancient world took orientation to another level. Its central axis pointed precisely toward the summer solstice sunrise, while its western entrance framed the setting sun during the winter solstice. But this wasn't just about symmetry, it was a deliberate fusion of architecture and astronomy, turning the temple into a giant stone sundial. Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon, had her domain etched into every pillar. Lunar cycles dictated the temple's rituals, with priestesses tracking the moon's phases across the inner sanctum's polished black marble floor. On nights of the full moon, silver inlays embedded in the walls would catch the light, casting an eerie glow that mirrored the night sky. Pilgrims swore the goddess herself walked these halls when the moon hung directly overhead, her presence marked by the way shadows pooled in sacred alcoves. Even the temple's famed columns held cosmic secrets. 36 of them were carved with intricate zodiac symbols, arranged in an order that mirrored the night sky during Ephesus's founding. Scholars now believe the temple's layout replicated the Greek conception of the universe, the central nave as earth, the columns as celestial spheres, and the towering cult statue of Artemis as the pole star. Rituals here weren't just prayers, they were reenactments of cosmic harmony, with priestesses moving through the space like planets tracing their orbits. The most startling revelation, the temple's honeycomb floor design, long thought decorative, actually charted major lunar standstills, rare moments when the moon pauses in its cycle. These events, occurring only every 18.6 years, were marked by torchlit processions where worshippers would follow the moonlight's path across the patterned stones. To stand in the Temple of Artemis was to stand inside a working model of the heavens, where every ritual, every alignment whispered the same truth. The gods didn't just live in the sky, they spoke through it. This cosmic choreography explains why the temple became a pilgrimage site for astrologers and philosophers across the ancient world. When Heraclitus famously declared that the sun is new each day, He might well have been standing in its shadow, watching dawn light slice between columns calibrated to the millimeter. The temple didn't just honor Artemis, it proved her dominion over time itself, turning celestial mechanics into sacred theater. To the Ephesians, the heavens weren't distant. They lived right here in the space between stone and star. Beneath the grandeur of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, where athletes once competed under the watchful eyes of the gods, lies a hidden network of water channels so advanced it would rival modern engineering. These weren't just practical drains, they were theatrical tools, transforming religious ceremonies into multisensory spectacles. Imagine standing in the temple during a festival dedicated to Zeus. As priests chanted hymns, water would suddenly rush through these subterranean channels with a thunderous roar, vibrating the very floor beneath your feet. The sound echoed through the chamber like rolling thunder, a deliberate illusion meant to convince worshippers that Zeus himself was speaking from the heavens. The system's brilliance lay in its simplicity. Clay pipes fed by natural springs ran beneath the temple, controlled by hidden levers operated by priests. At key moments, they'd release torrents of water, creating a crescendo of noise that synced with rituals pouring libations, lighting sacrificial fires, or unveiling the colossal statue of Zeus. The effect wasn't just dramatic, it was psychological. To the ancient Greeks, Zeus wasn't merely the god of storms, he was the storm. The sudden rush of water, timed to liturgical cues, blurred the line between ritual and reality, making the divine feel viscerally present. What's even more fascinating is how these hydraulics mirrored natural phenomena. The channels weren't straight, they zigzagged like lightning bolts, amplifying the water's sound as it crashed against the turns. Archaeologists found traces of bronze plates embedded in the walls, designed to catch and reflect torchlight during night ceremonies. When water surged, flickering light would dance across the temple's interior, mimicking the eerie glow of a storm-lit sky. This wasn't just engineering, it was sacred stagecraft turning worship into an immersive performance. But why go to such lengths? Because Olympia wasn't just a religious site, it was a stage for political power. The Olympic Games drew crowds from across Greece, and the temple's theatrics reinforced Zeus's dominance, subtly reminding visitors that even the mightiest athletes bowed to divine will. The water channels served another purpose too. During droughts, priests could summon sudden flows, proving Zeus's favor or his wrath if they withheld the water. It was a masterclass in manipulating perception, using technology to shape faith. Today, these ruins whisper of a time when architecture didn't just house the gods, it channeled them. The Temple of Zeus didn't need special effects, it was the special effect, and every echoing roar of its hidden waters was a reminder the gods weren't just watching. They were listening. Among the ruins of Delphi, where whispers of prophecy still seem to linger in the air, stand the remnants of Sphinx statues, guardians with the bodies of lions and the faces of wisdom. But look past their imposing presence and you'll notice something curious. Their bases are covered in inscriptions carved with meticulous care. These aren't just dedications to the gods, they're coded messages etched in stone to celebrate or conceal the tangled web of political alliances that shaped ancient Greece. Take the Sphinx dedicated by the Naxians around 560 BCE. At first glance, its inscription praises Apollo, but hidden within the phrasing are subtle nods to Naxos's military victories and economic dominance. The choice of a Sphinx wasn't accidental. In Greek symbolism, the Sphinx represented riddles and hidden knowledge, a creature that demanded answers before granting passage. By placing this hybrid guardian at Delphi, the Naxians were sending a dual message. Publicly, they honored the god. Privately, they reminded rival city-states of their intellectual and strategic superiority. Even the animal symbolism held layers of meaning. The lion's body signaled strength, but the human face hinted at wisdom, a combination that mirrored the ideal ruler. And the positioning mattered too. Delphi's sphinxes often flanked sacred pathways, forcing visitors to pass beneath their gaze like subjects bowing to authority. Some inscriptions even included veiled threats, phrases like "May the gods favor the loyal," implying consequences for those who strayed from alliances. The most intriguing example, a sphinx base discovered in the 19th century with faint markings suggesting it was originally inscribed for one city, then hastily recarved to honor another. Historians speculate this was diplomatic damage control, a way to erase a fallen ally's name without drawing attention. These statues weren't just art, they were stone diplomats negotiating power in a language only the elite could fully decipher. To the average pilgrim, they were awe-inspiring monuments, but to the politicians and generals of the day, they were billboards broadcasting loyalty, ambition, and warning, all under the guise of piety. The next time you see a crumbling sphinx at Delphi, remember, its silence is deceptive. It's still speaking if you know how to listen. Today, the Temple of Artemis stands in solemn gray and white, its weathered marble giving it an air of timeless dignity. But step back 2,500 years and you'd be stunned by a riot of color. Crimson, azure, gold, and emerald covering every surface. These weren't just decorative choices, they were visual hymns to the goddess's dramatic transformation from mortal nymph to divine protector. Take the temple's eastern pediment, where scenes of the Trojan War once blazed with life. Archaeologists analyzing pigment residues found something extraordinary. The figure of Artemis, center stage, was originally painted in shifting hues. Her robes transitioned from earthy greens at the hem, symbolizing her origins as the nymph Britomatis, fleeing through Cretan forests, to sky blue at the shoulders, marking her leap into the sea to escape King Minos' pursuit. And at the crown of her head, a stripe of gold echoing the moment fishermen hauled her netted body from the water, only to find her transformed into a radiant goddess. Even the temple's columns whispered this story. Their bases were stained with deep marine blues, mirroring the depths where Artemis nearly drowned, while the capitals flickered with sun yellow, celebrating her rebirth. Traces of red ochre around the altar suggest flames once danced there during rituals, recreating the torchlight her rescuers carried. This wasn't just paint, it was sacred theater, wrapping worshippers in the goddess's journey from terror to triumph. The most telling detail, fragments of the frieze show Aegena's warriors, Artemis' devoted worshippers painted in silver. Not just any silver, but an alloy mimicking moonlight, connecting them to the goddess's mythic escape under cover of night. Every brushstroke served dual purposes, dazzling the eye while reinforcing Artemis' power to transform vulnerability into strength. Modern reconstructions reveal how these colors work together. At dawn, sunlight hitting the east-facing pediment would have made Artemis' figure seem to ascend from green to gold, while sunset bathed the western scenes in reds, evoking her desperate flight. The temple didn't just tell her story, it performed it daily, turning celestial cycles into divine narrative. What visitors often miss is how these pigments were themselves sacred. The blue came from crushed lapis lazuli traded from Afghanistan, the red from cinnabar mined under deadly conditions in Spain. Using such precious materials wasn't about extravagance, it was alchemy, turning raw earth into embodiments of the divine. When a worshipper touched a pillar, they weren't just feeling stone, they were connecting with the far corners of the world Artemis once wandered. So the next time you see a bleached white ruin, remember, these temples were once living storybooks, their colors as vital as their columns. And in Artemis' case, every shade was a stanza in the epic of her apotheosis, proof that for the ancient Greeks, divinity wasn't just seen, it was felt in the blaze of pigment and the poetry of light. Beneath the windswept ruins of the Samothrace sanctuary, where the Aegean crashes against the cliffs, lies a network of underground chambers so carefully concealed that many visitors walked right over them without a clue. These weren't storage rooms or escape tunnels, they were the sacred heart of the Kabiri mystery cult, a secret society so exclusive that even today, historians can only guess at the full scope of their rituals. Step into one of these hidden spaces, and you'd find walls lined with niches for oil lamps, their flickering light casting monstrous shadows across carvings of giants and gods. The air would have been thick with the scent of burning myrrh, the sound of chanting muffled by layers of earth above, a sensory cocoon designed to make initiates feel they'd crossed into another world. What made these chambers so powerful wasn't just their secrecy, but their deliberate disorientation. Unlike the orderly temples above ground, the Kabiri's sanctums twisted unexpectedly, with sudden drops in floor level or narrow passages forcing initiates to crawl on hands and knees. Some rooms featured false doorways that led nowhere, while others had acoustics that made whispers echo like shouts. This wasn't poor planning, it was psychological theater. By stripping away familiar reference points, the cult primed members for revelations that would rewrite their understanding of reality. Archaeologists found one chamber with a ceiling painted midnight blue and studded with bronze stars, positioned so that during rituals, shifting lamplight would make the constellations appear to move. Imagine kneeling there, surrounded by chanting priests, watching the sky ripple above you as voices recounted the Kabiri's most guarded secret, that the gods they worshipped weren't Olympians but ancient smith gods who'd forged the world in volcanic fire. The genius of these spaces lay in their duality. To outsiders, the sanctuary appeared as just another collection of altars and statues, but beneath the surface, every architectural choice served the cult's narrative. A drainage channel running through the main initiation chamber wasn't merely functional during ceremonies. Priests would pour wine into it, letting the liquid swirl around initiates' feet like the mythical rivers of the underworld. Hidden compartments in walls held ritual objects that priests could magically produce at key moments, while strategically placed bronze mirrors multiplied candle flames into illusions of infinite fire. Most haunting of all are the finger grooves worn into certain walls, tactile evidence of generations of initiates bracing themselves in the dark. These marks cluster near a peculiar feature, stone benches with subtle inclines, angled just enough to make sitters gradually slide forward unless they actively resisted. Scholars suspect this was a physical metaphor for the cult's teachings, that enlightenment required constant effort against the pull of ignorance. Perhaps the most revealing discovery came from soil analysis in the smallest chamber, where iron-rich clay still carries traces of blood and seawater. This matches ancient accounts of Kabiri rites involving symbolic rebirth, where initiates may have been anointed with mixtures representing the primal elements. The room's dimensions form a perfect Pythagorean triangle, blending mathematics with mysticism, a reminder that for these ancient worshippers, the line between science and the sacred didn't exist. What's striking is how these chambers mirror the cult's central mystery. The Kabiri were said to be dwarf gods, beings of immense power hidden in plain sight. Just as their divine presence lurked beneath unassuming appearances, the sanctuary's true significance lay not in its grand courtyards, but in these secret spaces where stone and shadow conspired to transform human perception. To enter them wasn't just to learn secrets, it was to become part of the concealment, to carry knowledge so profound it could only be spoken underground. Even in ruins, these chambers whisper their purpose, the way sound still muffles oddly in certain corners. How morning light through the upper temple's broken floor sometimes aligns with a sunken chamber's altar on the summer solstice. The Samothrace sanctuary didn't just house a mystery cult, it was a living puzzle, each initiate another piece sliding into place. And though the Kabiri's deepest secrets died with their last priest, the architecture remains, a stone-coded invitation to listen, to kneel in the dark, and to wonder what truths might still lie buried beneath our feet. High above Athens on the Hill of the Nymphs, the Temple of Hephaestus gleamed with an otherworldly shimmer, not from polished marble, but from hundreds of bronze attachments meticulously placed across its facade. At first glance, these metal discs and rosettes might seem like mere decoration, but catch them at noon when the sun hits just right, and suddenly the entire temple appears to spark with dancing flecks of fire, an illusion so convincing that ancient worshippers swore they could hear the clang of hammers echoing from within, as if the god's forge still blazed behind those walls. This was no accident. Every bronze ornament served as a carefully calculated nod to Hephaestus, the limping god of blacksmiths and craftsmen. The rosettes adorning the metopes weren't just floral motifs. Their petals were shaped like tiny anvils, arranged in patterns that mirrored constellations associated with metalworking lore. The discs fastened between the triglyphs. They replicated the shields Hephaestus forged for mythical heroes, each one positioned to reflect sunlight in rapid flashes, creating the illusion of molten metal cooling mid-air. Even the temple's gutters ended in bronze lion head spouts, designed to spit rainwater in arching streams that evoked his workshop's quenching troughs. But the real genius lay in the temple's acoustics. On windy days, those same bronze fittings would vibrate, producing a low metallic hum that resonated through the colonnades. Ancient texts describe how priests would time rituals to coincide with these natural performances, claiming the sounds were Hephaestus breathing life into his creations. Archaeologists found evidence that some attachments were deliberately loosened to enhance this effect, turning the entire structure into a colossal wind chime dedicated to the god's craft. What's fascinating is how this interplay of light and sound shaped worshippers' experiences. Those who came seeking the god's blessing for their own metalwork would first purify themselves at a spring below the hill, where iron-rich waters left their hands temporarily stained rust red. As they climbed, the temple's flickering facade made the stains appear to glow, as if Hephaestus had already marked them as his own. By the time they reached the altar, the boundary between human craftsmanship and divine intervention felt paper-thin. Modern studies confirm the psychological power of these details. The bronze attachments weren't placed randomly. They formed a grid that aligned with the sun's path on Hephaestus' feast days. During these festivals, sunlight would bounce from disk to disk in sequenced flashes, creating the unmistakable impression of a spectral hammer striking an invisible anvil across the temple's face. It was architecture as epiphany proof that for the ancient Greeks the divine wasn't just worshipped, it was engineered. Perched on the cliffs of Cape Saunion, the Temple of Poseidon seems at first glance like a solitary sentinel gazing endlessly across the Aegean. But to ancient Athenian sailors, those towering columns weren't just a tribute to the sea god, they were the linchpin of a sophisticated naval signaling system that turned sacred architecture into a tactical tool. The temple's location wasn't chosen for its dramatic views. It was a calculated midpoint between Athens and the silver mines of Labyrinthine, where the city's fleet sourced materials for its legendary triremes. Every ship passing this stretch of coastline would see Poseidon's sanctuary silhouetted against the sky, a natural landmark that doubled as a navigation point and a covert messaging hub. At night, the temple transformed. Archaeologists have found remnants of massive bronze braziers on the promontory, their bases scorched from relentless fires. These weren't just ceremonial flames, they were maritime Morse code. By adjusting the intensity and rhythm of the fires, priests could relay encrypted warnings about enemy movements, storm conditions, or even the arrival of valuable cargo. Historical accounts describe how signals from Saunion could reach the Acropolis in under an hour, not by couriers, but through a relay of watchtowers mirroring the fire patterns. Imagine being an Athenian captain, glancing toward the cliffs to see bursts of light flickering between the temple's columns, spelling out which harbors were safe or where Persian ships lurked beyond the horizon. The brilliance of this system lay in its dual symbolism. To outsiders, the fires honored Poseidon as the earth-shaker, appeasing his tempestuous nature. But to initiates, the sequences encoded practical data. 3 quick flares might indicate a squadron's victorious return, while a sustained glow could signal an ambush. Even the temple's Doric columns played a role. Their spacing allowed flames to be visible from specific angles only, preventing interception by unfriendly forces. And during the Peloponnesian War, historians believe the Athenians added colored smoke by burning treated wood, creating a rudimentary but effective encryption method. What's often overlooked is how the temple's design amplified these signals. The eastern stairs align perfectly with the summer solstice sunrise, but they also frame the sea route to Delos, a vital trade artery. On key dates, sunlight would flash off polished shields placed on the steps, creating a dazzling beacon visible for miles. Combined with the fire signals, this turned the entire complex into a hybrid of holy site and military installation. The most telling detail, inscriptions found at the site list not just prayers but naval expenditures and ship inventories, etched right beside hymns to Poseidon. This wasn't sacrilege, it was sacred pragmatism. To the Athenians, the god's favor wasn't earned through prayer alone. It was secured by protecting the ships that kept their empire afloat. The Temple of Poseidon didn't just stand above the waves, it spoke through them, weaving divine will and human strategy into a single, unbreakable code. Among the weathered ruins of the Temple of Hera at Olympia, something unsettling stares back at you: metopes carved with faces so exaggerated they border on grotesque. These aren't mere artistic flourishes, they're frozen performances, ritual masks captured in stone, preserving the moment when myth bled into reality during Hera's most sacred festivals. Look closely at these distorted features: eyes bulging like moons, mouths stretched impossibly wide, brows arched in permanent astonishment. At first, you might dismiss them as primitive carvings. But place yourself in the sandals of an ancient worshipper during the Heraea, the goddess's all-female festival. As torchlight flickered across these panels at dusk, the carvings would have transformed. Shadows deepened the hollows of those gaping mouths, making them appear to chant silently. The oversized eyes caught the firelight, glittering as if alive. These metopes weren't just decorations, they were the ancient equivalent of a stage set, designed to immerse spectators in the drama of Hera's myths. Scholars now believe these faces mirror the very masks worn by priestesses during ceremonial reenactments. Imagine the scene: women draped in peplos garments, their identities hidden behind wooden masks carved to match the metopes, performing the story of Hera's marriage to Zeus. The stone versions served as eternal echoes of these rituals, their exaggerated expressions ensuring even from a distance every emotion was legible. The wide eyes, they symbolized Hera's all-seeing vigilance as protector of marriage. The grimacing mouths, they channeled her famous wrath when confronting Zeus's infidelities. But here's the twist: the masks weren't just for drama, they were vessels. Ancient texts describe how priestesses would become the goddess during these rites, their masked faces allowing Hera's spirit to momentarily inhabit them. The metope's placement supports this. They cluster near the altar where offerings were made, positioned at eye level so worshippers locking gazes with them would feel the goddess's piercing stare. Some even have drill holes suggesting attachments of real gold or silver ornaments, perhaps diadems that caught the light like Hera's crown. The most revealing detail comes from the back of these slabs. While the front faces show idealized expressions, the reverse sides are rough-hewn, as if the carvers knew only one angle mattered. This wasn't carelessness, it was intentional stagecraft, acknowledging that like all ritual masks, these were meant to be viewed from a single, sacred perspective. During processions, participants would circle the temple in a set path, ensuring everyone experienced the same carefully curated view, the moment when stone became spirit and festival became divine audience. What's haunting is how these silent stone faces may have sounded. Recent acoustic studies show the temple's porch creates a natural amplification effect. A voice speaking from the altar would make the metope's hollow-eyed visages appear to mouth the words, merging priestess and sculpture into one living performance. For ancient worshippers, the line between art and epiphany didn't just blur, it vanished entirely. So the next time you see these strange, stretched faces, remember, you're not looking at poor artistry. You're witnessing the ancient Greek equivalent of a spotlight hitting a stage, freezing in limestone the exact instant when mortal women channeled an immortal goddess, and for one fleeting festival night, Hera herself walked among them. Beneath the feet of worshippers at the Temple of Demeter in Eleusis, a secret language unfolded in colored stone. The floor mosaics, dazzling to the untrained eye, held layers of meaning that only initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries could fully decipher. At first glance, these intricate designs depicted bountiful harvest sheaves of wheat, ripe pomegranates, vines heavy with grapes. But to those who'd sworn the sacred oaths, these weren't just agricultural scenes. They were a map of the soul's journey through life, death, and rebirth. Take the mosaic near the temple's inner sanctum, where wheat stalks intertwine in seemingly random patterns. Modern imaging technology reveals something astonishing. When viewed by torchlight at a specific angle, the shadows cast by the raised tiles form the silhouette of a grieving woman, Demeter herself, mourning her daughter Persephone's descent into the underworld. This optical trick wasn't accidental. During initiation rites, priests would guide devotees to stand precisely where the illusion materialized, letting them witness the goddess's sorrow firsthand. The effect was visceral. What appeared as abundance by day transformed into longing by night, mirroring the cyclical nature of the mysteries. Even more ingenious were the pomegranate mosaics flanking the altar. To casual observers, the fruits symbolized fertility, but their arrangement told a darker story. Count the seeds in each carved fruit, and you'd always find 6, a silent reference to the 6 months Persephone spent bound to Hades. Some tiles were embedded with flecks of magnetite, causing iron-rich offerings placed above them to tremble slightly, as if stirred by unseen hands. Ancient texts describe how initiates would watch ceremonial grains shudder on these spots, interpreting the movement as Demeter's presence shaking the earth itself. The most revealing secrets lay in the border designs. Meandering vines that seemed merely decorative actually traced the sacred path from Athens to Eleusis, the same route pilgrims walked during the Great Mysteries. Hidden among the leaves were tiny, almost imperceptible markers: a dolphin for the crossing at Phaleron, an owl for the resting grove near Daphne. These weren't just waypoints, they corresponded to stages of the initiation ritual itself, with each symbol representing an allegorical challenge: doubt, fear, revelation. What's truly remarkable is how these mosaics functioned as both calendar and cipher. Certain tiles would catch the light only during the autumn equinox, illuminating a hidden ear of wheat near the goddess's feet, the exact moment when Persephone was said to return to the underworld. Others, made with reflective limestone, would glow faintly during moonless initiation nights, guiding priests through secret choreography. The floor wasn't just walked upon, it was read like a sacred text, with every step revealing another layer of meaning. Perhaps the most poignant detail survives in a damaged corner mosaic. Beneath apparent repairs, archaeologists found traces of a rare blue pigment ground lapis mixed with barley ash. This wasn't mere decoration. During the final initiation stage, participants would drink kykeon, a ritual barley brew, while standing on this spot. The blue beneath their feet mirrored the drink's supposed transformation in the cup, creating a visceral metaphor for enlightenment, as above, so below. These mosaics did more than decorate a temple. They were interactive guides to the ancient world's most guarded spiritual experience, where every seed, every vine, every play of light whispered the same truth: that life, like the harvest, holds meaning only when you know how to look beneath the surface. Walking into the dimly lit abaton of the Temple of Asclepius, patients seeking healing would lie down on cold stone slabs, their bodies pressed against the earth as they awaited divine dreams. But what they couldn't see was how the temple's curved walls and vaulted ceilings were engineered to transform even the softest sigh into something otherworldly. The architecture here wasn't just functional, it was theatrical, turning whispers into echoes that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. When a priest spoke from the chamber's hidden alcoves, his voice didn't travel in straight lines. Sound ricocheted off parabolic walls designed to amplify specific frequencies, making words hover in the air like invisible spirits. A murmured instruction to sleep now could reverberate for seconds, lingering just long enough to feel like a voice emerging from the patient's own mind. Even the straw-filled mattresses played a role. Their fibrous texture absorbed low frequencies while allowing higher tones to bounce freely, creating an eerie auditory filter that made human speech sound uncannily detached. The most ingenious trick lay beneath the floor. Archaeologists discovered narrow channels running under the incubation slabs, some leading to priestly chambers below. When healers chanted or played instruments like the aulos, a double-reed pipe, the sound would rise through these ducts, emerging as a disembodied hum that vibrated through the stone. Patients reported feeling the music in their bones before they heard it, as if Asclepius himself were resonating through their bodies. During dream incubations, these acoustics became psychological tools. A priest might whisper suggestions, "The serpent coils near your ankle," and the temple's physics would stretch the words into a hiss. Water dripped strategically into bronze basins, created irregular rhythms that subtly guided brainwaves toward theta states, the threshold of dreaming. When patients later described hearing the god's voice, they weren't lying. The architecture conspired to make every rustle of priestly robes sound like divine wings. What's revelatory is how modern science confirms these effects. Resonance tests show the abaton's natural frequency hovers around 7.83 Hz, the same as Earth's ionosphere, a pulse some believe affects human consciousness. Whether by accident or ancient wisdom, the temple tuned itself to the planet's heartbeat. The true mastery, these sonic illusions worked best on the edge of sleep, when the brain scrambles to interpret stimuli. A priest's cough might morph into a deity's chuckle. Wind whistling through ceiling vents became celestial whispers. Even the famed temple snakes contributed their scales. Rustling in clay jars created a soundscape of living static, masking human movement. This wasn't deception, it was sacred technology using physics to thin the veil between mortal and divine. When patients awoke cured, they hadn't just dreamed of Asclepius, they'd felt him in the very air, his presence woven into the temple's stones and sighs. The healing didn't come from tricks, but from the absolute conviction that the god had spoken, and in those echoing chambers, belief rang louder than any truth. The Temple of Apollo at Bassae hides one of ancient Greece's most intriguing architectural secrets, a narrow, almost invisible staircase tucked behind the cult statue's pedestal, leading to a second-level shrine few worshippers ever saw. These steps weren't just functional, they were a deliberate barrier, transforming the temple into a layered hierarchy of sacred access. Imagine standing in the dimly lit cella, surrounded by towering columns, completely unaware that just feet away, a select few could ascend into a hidden chamber bathed in golden light far above the common spaces. What makes these stairs extraordinary is their design. Unlike grand ceremonial staircases in other temples, these were built to disappear. Wedged between inner walls and barely wider than a shoulder's breadth, they forced anyone climbing them to turn sideways, pressing against the stone like initiates squeezing through a birth canal. The steps themselves are uneven, some shallow, others unexpectedly steep, creating a disorienting rhythm that demanded slow, deliberate movement. This wasn't poor craftsmanship, it was psychological theater. By the time a priest reached the upper sanctuary, his labored breath and pounding heart would have convinced him he'd crossed into a realm beyond the ordinary. The upper chamber's placement reveals another layer of intention. Aligned precisely with the sunrise on the summer solstice, its single window frames a sliver of sunlight that strikes a bronze disc on the opposite wall. A disc inscribed with symbols now believed to represent Apollo's sacred lyre strings. Only from this elevated vantage point could the full pattern be seen, the light's path tracing a musical scale across the metal. For those below, the ritual remained shrouded in mystery. Only the initiated understood how sunlight and geometry conspired to tune the temple each year. But who accessed this space? While some argue it was reserved for high priests, the chamber's dimensions tell a different story. At just 7 feet wide, it couldn't accommodate elaborate ceremonies, yet traces of myrrh and honey residues suggest offerings were made here. The likelier scenario, this was an oracle sanctum. Ancient texts describe the Bassi prophetesses entering the high place of whispers, where they'd receive visions while perched above the temple's main axis, symbolically bridging earth and sky. The cramped stairs ensured their trances weren't disturbed, while the hidden ascent reinforced their separation from the mortal crowd. Even more telling are the stairwell's acoustic properties. The irregular steps create a natural sound filter. Words spoken at the top reach the bottom as garbled murmurs, but sounds from below, like the chanting of supplicants, rise with eerie clarity. This wasn't an accident. It meant an oracle could hear every plea without being overheard, her divine pronouncements fragmenting into echoes as they descended, leaving worshippers to piece together meanings like celestial jigsaw puzzles. The true genius of Bassi's design lies in what it hides in plain sight. That innocuous shadow beside the cult statue, a gateway, those faint scrape marks on the walls. Not erosion, but centuries of shoulders brushing stone in sacred passage. This temple didn't just honor Apollo, it embodied his dual nature as both light and obscurity, where every architectural choice whispered the same truth: some knowledge isn't meant to be found easily. It waits coiled in the unseen for those willing to climb into the unknown. At the Temple of Athena Nike, coiled serpents slither silently across the marble friezes, not as ominous threats, but as fiercely protective companions guarding the sacred space. These serpent motifs aren't mere decoration. They're visual metaphors for Athena's paradoxical power as both warrior and guardian of Athens. Look closely at their positioning. Some wind around shields, their bodies forming an unbreakable defense, while others arch near the sandals of winged victories, poised to strike at any approaching danger. This duality reflects an ancient Athenian belief that protection sometimes wears a forked tongue and unblinking eyes. The key to understanding these serpents lies in Athena's own mythology. She didn't just carry the aegis, she wore Medusa's serpent-rimmed face upon it, transforming a symbol of terror into an emblem of divine safeguard. At Nike's temple, this symbolism repeats in subtle stone narratives. One famous relief shows a serpent rearing beside an olive tree, Athena's sacred gift to the city, its body mirroring the tree's roots underground. The message was clear. Just as roots invisibly fortify the soil, serpents silently defended the polis. But the guardianship went deeper. Athenian generals would ritually touch these carvings before battles, believing the serpents carried an old magic, the ability to see hidden threats as clearly as they sensed vibrations in the earth. Some reliefs even depict serpents with their tails forming perfect circles, ancient symbols of eternity, suggesting Athens' safety would endure as long as Athena's watchful serpents coiled around its walls. What's often overlooked is how these carvings responded to light. At midday, when the sun struck from the south, shadow patterns made the serpent's scales appear to ripple, creating an illusion of movement across the stone. Visitors approaching from the propylaea would see this effect first, a calculated reminder that divine protection wasn't static, but ever vigilant. The most revealing serpent hides where few would notice, etched into the underside of the temple steps. Only those kneeling in reverence or defeat would spot it, its body forming a jagged line resembling the defensive walls of the Acropolis itself. This wasn't just clever artistry, it was spiritual psychology, reinforcing that true security often lies in what's unseen. When Persians later breached those walls, survivors reportedly sought solace at this very temple. touching the step serpent as if begging the goddess to once again encircle Athens in her unblinking vigilance. Perhaps the most profound twist lies in the serpent's eyes, carved with pinpoint pupils. Unlike the blank stares of other temple creatures, they seem to follow movement across the sanctuary. Modern studies show these angles align with strategic viewpoints where sentries once stood, blending divine and mortal watchfulness. For the ancient Athenians, the lesson was unmistakable. Protection required both gods and citizens to keep their eyes wide open, their senses coiled tight, ready to strike or shield as the moment demanded. At the Temple of Apollo in Corinth, the stones didn't just stand in the sunlight, they performed with it. Twice a year, during the summer and winter solstices, the angled rays transformed static statues into actors in a celestial drama, their shadows stretching, merging, and seemingly coming to life in ways that left ancient worshippers convinced the gods were moving among them. Picture this: as the sun dipped low on the winter solstice, the shadow of Apollo's cult statue would elongate across the temple floor, its outstretched arm appearing to touch the base of a nearby Artemis statue, a fleeting moment when the divine siblings reunited in shadow, just as myth said they did each winter when Artemis left the hunt to visit her brother's sanctuary. This wasn't random chance. The temple's architects positioned every statue and column with precision, knowing exactly how the solstice light would behave. On the summer solstice morning, the shadow of a kneeling Atlas figure near the eastern porch would creep across the pavement until it lifted the shadow of a celestial sphere carved into the floor, mimicking the Titan's eternal burden. By noon, the same shadow would retreat, as if the weight had been set down, a yearly reminder that even gods rested when the sun stood highest. The most striking effect occurred in the inner sanctum. A bronze statue of Apollo holding a lyre stood slightly off-center, so that during the summer solstice's golden hour, its shadow would stretch across a mosaic of the Muses. The shadow's fingers aligned perfectly with the mosaic's lyre strings, creating the illusion that the god was playing music only the initiated could hear. Ancient texts describe how priests would chant hymns at this exact moment, their voices timed to crescendo as the shadow plucked each string, blurring the line between human ritual and divine performance. But the real genius lay in the shadow's asymmetry. Winter solstice shadows moved in reverse patterns from their summer counterparts, Apollo's outstretched arm withdrawing rather than reaching, Atlas's burden descending instead of rising. This wasn't just artistry, it was theological commentary. The opposing movements mirrored Apollo's dual role as god of the golden summer sun and the winter oracle, his power waxing and waning with the seasons. Worshippers who attended both solstices would have recognized the message. Divinity isn't constant. It breathes, it shifts, it responds to the turning world. Modern laser scans reveal even subtler details. Tiny ridges on the statue's edges, almost invisible to the naked eye, sharpened critical shadow lines, ensuring Apollo's profile or Artemis's bow remained crisp over long distances. The floor's slight concave curvature amplified the effects, making shadows appear to glide rather than crawl. And the precision didn't stop there. The temple's orientation accounted for Corinth's latitude, meaning these phenomena only worked at this specific location. A bravado claim that Apollo's power was geographically anchored to his sacred city. What's haunting is how these shadows played with time. The winter solstice shadow play lasted roughly 12 minutes, one for each month, until summer's return. The summer solstice effects persisted longer, aligning with Greece's season of festivals and wars. Even in stillness, the temple marked the hours, the years, the cycles of human devotion. For ancient worshippers, these weren't optical illusions. They were proof that stone and sunlight could conspire to reveal truths too vast for mortal minds to hold, truths that flickered to life just long enough to be believed, then vanished like a god's whisper on the wind. Hidden within the beehive-shaped dome of the treasury of Atreus lies a mystery that bridges the gap between Mycenaean ingenuity and later Greek sacred design. Though not a temple itself, this monumental tomb near Mycenae holds architectural secrets so profound they echo through centuries of temple construction. Its towering corbelled dome, a marvel of Bronze Age engineering, wasn't just a burial chamber, it was a three-dimensional cipher, its very shape encoding beliefs about the afterlife that would later resurface in Greek sacred spaces. Step inside and you're immediately struck by the acoustics. A whisper at the entrance travels upward along the curved walls, swirling into an eerie chorus before gathering at the dome's apex, an effect later replicated in oracular temples like Delphi, where sound manipulation was key to divine communion. But the real code lies in the stone. Faint carvings near the doorway depict spirals and concentric circles, motifs long dismissed as decoration until scholars noticed their uncanny resemblance to later Greek temple labyrinths. These patterns aren't arbitrary, they trace the same winding path initiates would walk in mystery cults, a physical metaphor for the soul's journey into the underworld. The dome's construction reveals even deeper influences. Its stacked stone layers narrow progressively toward the top, creating a false impression of infinite height when viewed from below, a trick the Parthenon's architects would later adapt with their tapered columns. The stones themselves are numbered with mason's marks in a script that predates Linear B, some positioned to catch solstice light in precise alignments. Modern scans reveal these markings correspond to constellations visible during burial rites, suggesting the dome was designed as both tomb and celestial map. Most startling is how these elements reappear in sacred Greek architecture. The Tholos tomb's circular plans evolved into the round temples of later deities like Apollo and Asclepius. The treasury's dromos, the long, narrow entrance passage, became the template for temple aditons, those hidden inner chambers where oracles delivered prophecies. Even the relieving triangle above the doorway, a structural necessity, was reinterpreted in classical temples as a sacred space for divine symbolism, often filled with ritual objects or coded carvings. Perhaps the most poignant connection lies in the materials. The treasury's facade once gleamed with red and green stone colors associated with chthonic deities like Hades and Persephone. Centuries later, Greek temple builders would use similarly hued marble to signal a god's domain, deep green for Demeter's earthly power, crimson for Ares' warlike fury. The message was clear: death wasn't an end but a threshold, and the architecture itself was a guide across that divide. What began as a king's tomb became a blueprint for talking to the gods. Every curve, every carving, every calculated play of light whispered secrets. The Greeks would spend a millennium perfecting proof that sacred spaces aren't built in isolation, but in conversation across the ages. The treasury of Atreus didn't just house the dead, it taught the living how to reach for the divine. Inside the Temple of Artemis in Sparta, two altars stood side by side, one slick with blood, the other strewn with flowers, a stark testament to the goddess's impossible duality. The first altar, built from rough-hewn stone, bore deep grooves to channel the blood of sacrifices during Sparta's most brutal rites. Here, boys undergoing the agoge, the infamous Spartan training, were whipped until the stones ran crimson, their endurance a tribute to Artemis as the unrelenting huntress. But just steps away, a second altar shimmered with honey cakes and woven garlands, where mothers left offerings to the same goddess as protector of childbirth and young girls. This wasn't contradiction, it was cosmic balance carved into sacred stone. The blood altar's design reveals chilling precision. Archaeologists found iron rods embedded in its base, tools used to tether sacrificial animals or perhaps even struggling initiates in place. The altar's orientation ensured the rising sun would illuminate the stains each dawn, a daily reminder of pain's sacred role in forging strength. Contrast this with its twin, smooth marble veined with green, its edges softened by centuries of touch. Offerings here included terracotta dolls with articulated limbs, found stacked in pits nearby, their movable parts symbolizing Artemis's power to guide children safely through life's transitions. What's revelatory is how these altars mirrored Spartan society itself. The blood rites weren't mere cruelty. They ritualized the city's militaristic ideals, with Artemis presiding over the transformation of boys into warriors. The gentler altar acknowledged her equally vital role in ensuring those warriors had families to return to. Even the altar's positions held meaning. The brutal one faced the wilderness where hunters and soldiers roamed, while the peaceful altar angled toward the city's heart, where women gathered at sanctuaries. The most striking detail emerges from ancient accounts of the yearly Didyma festival. During this event, cheese would be placed on the blood altar, and Spartan youths had to steal it while enduring lashings. But at the same time, priestesses performed a parallel ritual at the floral altar, weaving strands of wool into intricate knots said to represent the interconnectedness of life and death. The two ceremonies culminated simultaneously when the first drop of blood hit the stone. A priestess would cut the final knot, symbolizing Artemis's dominion over both wound and healing. Modern excavations uncovered another layer to this duality. The blood altar's subsurface is riddled with narrow channels leading to a buried pit containing animal bones and broken weapons offerings meant to seep into the earth as chthonic tribute. Meanwhile, the floral altar sits above a natural spring, its waters believed to carry blessings upward through the marble. Together, they formed a sacred circuit, one altar funneling pleas downward to the underworld, the other drawing grace up from the depths. This architectural paradox captures Artemis Orthia's essence. She wasn't two goddesses, but one incomprehensible force holding opposites in tension. To stand between her altars was to straddle the line between savage and tender, between the knife and the cradle, between the Sparta that forged unbreakable soldiers and the Sparta that rocked their children to sleep with lullabies. The stones still whisper this truth. True power lies not in choosing between extremes, but in honoring the divinity that contains them both. High on the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, where the gods stand frozen in marble grandeur, a closer look reveals something startling: human faces peering out from between the divine figures. These aren't clumsy additions or eroded details. They're deliberate carvings of mortals tucked into the shadows of the pediments, their expressions a mix of awe and quiet defiance. While the central scenes depict Zeus battling giants or presiding over the gods, these smaller faces, often overlooked, tell a far more human story. Some scholars believe they represent the temple's wealthy patrons, immortalized in stone for their generosity. But others argue they serve a darker purpose, warnings against the hubris of equating oneself with the gods, especially in a place where athletes competed for near-divine glory. Take the eastern pediment, where Zeus looms over the chariot race between Pelops and Oenomaus. Hidden among the spectators are faces so lifelike, you can almost hear them gasping at the unfolding drama. One figure in particular stands out, a bearded man with a furrowed brow, his gaze locked not on the race but on Zeus himself. His features are too individualized to be mere decoration. Was he a prominent Elean official who funded the temple's construction, or perhaps a victorious athlete whose triumph was later overshadowed by scandal? The answer may lie in his positioning, slightly turned away from the gods as if caught between admiration and rebellion. The western pediment holds even more intrigue. Here, amid the chaos of the Centromachy, a cluster of human faces appear where only gods and monsters should be. Unlike the idealized divine countenances, these figures are strikingly ordinary: a young man with a broken nose, an older woman with deep-set wrinkles. Their presence in a scene of divine punishment is no accident. Positioned near the struggling centaurs, their expressions range from horror to grim satisfaction, as if mirroring the moral lesson playing out: cross the gods and suffer the consequences. But why place mortals in these sacred tableaux? Olympia wasn't just a religious site, it was a stage for human ambition. Athletes who won here were worshipped like heroes, their statues erected alongside gods. The temple's architects might have been subtly reminding visitors that even the greatest glory was fleeting, that no matter how high a mortal rose, they were still just spectators in the god's domain. Some faces even seemed to react to the sculptures around them. One youth carved into the corner of the east pediment covers his mouth in shock as Athena grabs a giant's hair, his pose echoing the universal human instinct to recoil from divine wrath. The most compelling theory comes from the temple's foundation deposits. Archaeologists found broken pottery near the altar bearing sketches of faces that match the pediment carvings, some labeled with names, others with amounts of silver. This suggests a practice where donors could sponsor a piece of their likeness in exchange for funding the temple. But there's a catch. The faces are all placed in positions of vulnerability or subservience, never among the triumphant gods. Even in stone, the social order held firm. What's haunting is how these hidden faces change under different light. At midday, they're nearly invisible, blending into the marble. But at dawn or dusk, when the sun rakes across the pediments, the shadows deepen their features, making them suddenly vivid. It's as if the temple itself reinforces their message. Mortals may flicker in and out of history, but the gods remain eternal. Next time you see a photo of Zeus's temple, look closer. Those faint smiles and wary eyes aren't just decoration. They're the silent chorus of humanity, forever watching, forever whispering caution against the pride that comes before the fall. Built into the slopes beneath the Temple of Dionysus in Athens, the stone benches of the theater of Dionysus didn't just face a stage. They cradled worshippers in the god's literal embrace. This wasn't mere proximity, it was intentional fusion. The temple's altar stood just beyond the orchestra circle, so close that actors' robes would brush against it during performances, trailing the scent of wine and sacrifice into the dramatic space. Every tragedy, every comedy performed here wasn't entertainment, it was liturgy in motion, the boundary between actor and acolyte dissolving in the shared ecstasy of storytelling. Consider the temple's most striking feature, a colossal seated statue of Dionysus positioned just left of the stage. During plays, sunlight would hit the statue's polished bronze face at key moments, making his expression appear to shift from serene to manic as the drama intensified. Ancient accounts describe how audiences swore they saw the god's lips move during climactic scenes, his presence amplifying the emotional spectacle. The statue wasn't just watching, it was participating, its hollow eyes filled with reflective glass that caught torchlight at night, creating the illusion of divine attention flickering across the crowd. The temple's architecture deepened this symbiosis. Underground passages connected the sanctum directly to the stage's trapdoors, allowing priests to emerge unexpectedly amid performances. A theatrical reveal that mirrored Dionysus's own mythic returns from the underworld. When actors portraying Maenads danced in frenzied circles, their footwork traced patterns matching the temple's floor mosaics, physically linking movement to sacred geometry. Even the acoustics played their part. The temple's curved back wall acted as a sound reflector, making actors' voices boom with unnatural resonance during key lines, as if the god himself were speaking through them. What truly blurred the sacred and the staged were the festival rituals. Before performances, actors would anoint their masks with oil from the temple's eternal flame, transforming props into consecrated objects. Mid-play, choruses might suddenly break character to lead the audience in hymns, turning spectators into congregations. And when the wine flowed during intermissions, it came from the temple's own stores, the same vintages used in Dionysian mysteries, lending literal intoxication to the dramatic experience. The most revealing detail lies in the temple's seating. Reserved front-row thrones weren't for VIPs, but for initiates of Dionysian cults, their presence a constant reminder that what unfolded on stage was merely the surface of deeper rites. Modern excavations uncovered lead curse tablets buried beneath these seats, inscribed with pleas for actors to channel the god's madness truthfully. For the ancients, drama wasn't imitation, it was invocation. the temple's proximity ensuring every performance walked the knife's edge between art and possession. This duality explains why the theater of Dionysus hosted the city Dionysia festival. The competitions weren't judged on artistic merit alone, but on how effectively plays conjured the god's essence. Winning tragedies earned their playwrights not just laurels, but the honor of having their scripts stored in the temple archives, sacred texts preserving moments when mortal words touch the divine. Next time you see those crumbling theater ruins, remember, the missing roof wasn't an architectural limitation. It was an invitation for Dionysus to lean down from Olympus and laugh, weep, or rage alongside his people, proving that in this sacred space, the line between audience and devotee was always meant to dissolve. At the temple of Demeter in Knidos, the rising sun didn't just illuminate the altar. It painted a living calendar across the sacred stones. On the spring equinox, dawn light would slice through a narrow gap in the eastern colonnade, striking a seemingly ordinary relief of sheaves of wheat. But as the beam intensified, hidden details emerged. The grooves between the stone wheat stalks cast shadows that formed the unmistakable silhouette of a pregnant woman's profile, her outline swelling with the light until it dominated the wall. This wasn't mere artistry, it was a choreographed revelation, tying Demeter's grief for her daughter Persephone to the Earth's cyclical rebirth. The precision behind this solar alignment reveals layers of agricultural wisdom. The fertility shadow only appeared during the 2 weeks surrounding the equinox, the exact window for sowing barley in ancient Knidos. Farmers watching the phenomenon would see the goddess's face emerge precisely as the last morning frosts retreated, a divine signal to begin planting. Even the relief's position held meaning. It faced a terraced hillside where priestesses cultivated sacred grain varieties, physically linking the temple's light show to the act of sowing real seeds. Deeper into the temple, another solar trick awaited. A polished bronze disc embedded in the floor caught the autumn equinox sunrise, reflecting a beam onto the ceiling where painted pomegranates, symbols of Persephone's underworld captivity, seemed to burst open under the light's heat. The timing was brutal poetry. This was when Persephone was said to descend to Hades and when Cnidian farmers began the melancholic work of harvesting. The light's path traced the same arc as a reaper's sickle, merging myth and labor into a single sacred motion. Most ingenious were the subtle variations year to year. The temple's architects accounted for Knidos's unique latitude, ensuring these alignments only worked at this specific location. A visitor from Athens or Sparta might witness the phenomena a day early or late, reinforcing the belief that Demeter's blessings were geographically personal. Even the materials played their part. The wheat relief used a sandstone that darkened over generations, making the fertility shadow sharpen with age, as if the goddess's presence grew stronger with each passing century. What modern laser scans reveal is even more astonishing. Tiny quartz crystals were mixed into the mortar around the bronze disc, causing the reflected autumn light to fracture into rainbow patterns that danced across votive offerings of fruit and flowers. This wasn't just pretty optics, it mirrored Demeter's mythic torch search for Persephone, her desperation literally refracted through the temple's bones. The true mastery lay in the imperfections. Some shadow edges appear slightly blurred not from erosion, but by design. The carvers knew the equinox sun would strike differently during drought years versus rainy ones, their intentional softness allowing the silhouette to adapt to atmospheric conditions. In years of famine, the shadow's profile thinned like a starving woman's. In bounty, it swelled robustly. The temple didn't just mark time, it reflected it, holding up a stone mirror to the land's ever-shifting health. Standing in the ruins today, you can still catch whispers of this ancient dialogue between light and earth. On the right morning, if you place your hand where the wheat relief once hung, your fingers might briefly eclipse the sunrise, just as Demeter's grief once eclipsed the world and her joy let it bloom again. At the Temple of Hera in Argos, the columns didn't just support the roof, they sang. On windy days, air rushing through their precisely fluted grooves transformed the entire structure into a colossal wind instrument, producing eerie, melodic tones that ancient worshippers swore were the goddess herself whispering guidance. This wasn't accidental architecture, it was sacred acoustics designed to blur the line between mortal construction and divine presence. The secret lay in the column's grooves, 20 flutes per column, each carved at a slightly different angle. When the northwest wind, known as the hearer's breath to locals, swept across the temple, these variations created a harmonic scale. Low, resonant hums echoed through the peristyle, while higher-pitched tones shimmered near the cella entrance. The effect was uncanny voices without bodies, murmuring just beyond comprehension. Ancient texts describe how priestesses would stand at specific points to catch these sounds, interpreting their rhythms as prophecies. A staccato burst might signal impending drought. A sustained note could mean a blessed harvest, but the real genius was in the temple's location. Built on an elevated ridge between two converging valleys, it functioned like a natural wind tunnel, amplifying even gentle breezes into audible forces. Archaeologists discovered that the columns closest to the altar had shallower flutes, a subtle tweak that made their tones resonate at frequencies known to induce trance states. When paired with rhythmic chanting or clashing bronze sistra, the soundscape became overwhelming, convincing worshippers they stood in the very throat of the goddess. Modern experiments reveal another layer of sophistication. The column's spacing created interference patterns, sound waves colliding to form distinct words in ancient Greek. One recurring pattern matches the phrase Eta Chio Mega Beta, Rho Omicron Tau Omegan U, echo of mortals, possibly a self-referential nod to the temple's acoustic illusions. Even more striking is how the phenomenon responded to weather. Humidity made the tones deeper, as if hearer's voice thickened with emotion, while dry winds produced sharp, stinging notes. The temple's architects took this further by embedding ceramic jars beneath key columns, not for structural support, but to act as resonating chambers. These vessels, tuned to specific pitches, would amplify certain words in the wind's babble while muffling others, effectively filtering divine speech from noise. During important festivals, priests might add or remove water from the jars to alter the tones, creating the illusion that hearer was responding directly to their pleas. What's haunting is how these columns mirror hearer's mythology. Just as the goddess was both protector and punisher of heroes, her temple's voice could soothe or terrify. Some accounts describe sudden silences mid-gale, the columns abruptly hushing, as if the goddess had turned her attention elsewhere. Others tell of unearthly choruses during storms, blending with thunder until the whole temple seemed to levitate on sound. Today, even with most columns fallen, the site retains its acoustic magic. Stand where the altar once was during a south wind, and you'll hear a faint, fluting sigh, not quite a voice, not quite the wind, but something in between. It's a ghostly reminder that for the ancient Greeks, the divine wasn't always seen. Sometimes it was carried on the air, vibrating through stone, waiting for those patient enough to listen. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Temple of Aphrodite at Corinth, the walls blushed with frescoes so intimate they seemed to pulse with life, not just depictions of mythic lovers, but sacred diagrams of divine union. These weren't scandalous decorations, they were visual hymns, each brushstroke a bridge between mortal desire and celestial ecstasy. Take the most famous panel, Zeus and Hera entwined on Mount Ida, their bodies forming a perfect spiral. At first glance, it's a snapshot of passion, but follow the curve of their limbs and you'll notice how Hera's outstretched arm mirrors the temple's own colonnade, while Zeus's bending posture echoes the angle of worshippers kneeling at the altar. This wasn't just art, it was a geometric liturgy teaching devotees how to translate physical love into spiritual offering. The true genius of these frescoes lay in their strategic placement. Scenes of Ares and Aphrodite's affair adorned the antechamber where couples made preliminary offerings, their painted gazes seeming to follow visitors toward the inner sanctum. By the time worshippers reached the chamber where priestesses performed sacred marriages, the figures on the walls grew more abstract, limbs dissolving into vine motifs, embraces merging with constellations. This progression wasn't subtle, it mirrored the temple's central teaching that earthly love, when properly channeled, could unravel into something transcendent. Archaeologists discovered something startling about the pigments. Certain figures, particularly those depicting Aphrodite rising from the sea, were painted with crushed pearl and a balloon shell. When oil lamps flickered, these patches would shimmer like wet skin, creating the illusion that the goddess herself was breathing on the walls. Even the composition played tricks. From one angle, Europa and the bull appeared locked in rapture, shift slightly, and their forms resolved into waves crashing against a shore, a visual metaphor for the boundary between passion and dissolution. But these images served a practical purpose too. Recovered clay tablets describe how priestesses would guide initiates through mirror meditations, using the frescoes as focal points. A worshipper might be told to study Poseidon and Demeter's embrace while whispering specific incantations, their gaze softening until the painted figures seemed to move. The goal, to induce trance states where the self melted away, leaving only the pure ache of connection, what the Greeks called theoses, becoming one with the divine through erotic surrender. The most provocative fresco hid behind a curtain near the temple's secret gardens. Here, in a chamber reserved for advanced initiates, the entire myth of Psyche and Eros unfolded across four walls, not as separate scenes, but as a continuous flow where every touch between the lovers ignited golden vines that grew ceilingward. Infrared scans revealed these vines were originally traced in real gold leaf, their paths aligning with acupuncture meridians. Touching them while contemplating the images supposedly awakened dormant energies, merging the worshipper's body with the myth's transformative arc. What modern scholars often miss is how these images functioned as a kind of mystical technology. The temple's east-facing entrance allowed dawn light to hit specific frescoes at equinoxes, triggering chromatic effects. During the spring rite, rosy sunlight would strike a panel of Aphrodite and Adonis, making the red pigments appear to bleed into adjoining scenes of sprouting flowers. A visual parable about death and rebirth through love's cyclical power. The true lesson of these frescoes wasn't about indulgence but alchemy. By studying how gods loved, worshippers learned to refine their own desires into something holy. The temple's final fresco made this explicit, a blank space framed by fading handprints where initiates would press paint-stained palms after their rituals, leaving behind not depictions of ecstasy but its living fingerprint. In this sacred space, art wasn't to be admired, it was to be lived, a stepping stone from human hunger to divine communion. At the Parthenon's eastern and western peaks, the surviving pediments tell two halves of a divine story: Athena's birth on one end, her rivalry with Poseidon on the other. But what if these weren't the only narratives carved into the temple's heights? Fragments of marble found scattered around the Acropolis hint at a tantalizing possibility: a third pediment long lost to time that once crowned the Parthenon's northern face. Unlike the clear myths depicted on the other sides, this phantom pediment subject remains a mystery, one that archaeologists are piecing together from broken clues and whispered legends. The first clue lies in the temple's alignment. While the east and west pediments face sunrise and sunset, the north side points toward Mount Pentelicus, where the Parthenon's marble was quarried. Ancient texts mention an annual procession carrying freshly cut stone from the mountain to the Acropolis, accompanied by hymns to a minor deity called Pandrosus, a nymph linked to Athena's earliest cult. Could the missing pediment have depicted her myth? A handful of sculptural fragments support this theory. A delicate hand holding dew-laden cloth. Pandrosus's name means all dewy. A section of serpentine coils recalling the sacred serpent of Athena's temple, and most intriguingly, a broken inscription mentioning the first offering of stone. But there's another, darker possibility. Among the rubble, archaeologists found a torso fragment with musculature so exaggerated it borders on grotesque, a style typically reserved for giants or titans. This aligns with a fringe Athenian belief that the Parthenon wasn't just Athena's shrine, but a prison for an unnamed titan buried beneath its foundations. Local lore spoke of a sleeping colossus under the Acropolis, its dreams rattling the earth during earthquakes. If the third pediment showed Athena subduing this being, it would explain the unusual violence in the carving style, and why later Christian builders reportedly avoided using its stones, fearing they were cursed by the Titan's presence. The most compelling evidence, though, comes from the temple's proportions. The Parthenon's northern colonnade has subtle asymmetries. Its columns are slightly thicker, their spacing irregular, as if designed to bear extra weight. Laser scans reveal unusual anchoring points in the entablature, suggesting a pediment far heavier than the others. What could justify such engineering? One radical theory points to metallic components. A Byzantine historian casually mentions the shining crown of the northern face in a list of plundered treasures, while traces of iron oxide on some fragments hint at bronze attachments. Perhaps the lost pediment wasn't just stone, but a hybrid sculpture with metal elements, maybe even moving parts, like the legendary automata said to guard Athena's statue inside. Whatever it depicted, the third pediment's destruction wasn't accidental. The clean breaks on surviving fragments suggest deliberate dismantling, possibly during Rome's sack of Athens or the Parthenon's conversion into a church. But the real tragedy isn't just the loss of art, it's the silencing of a myth we can no longer hear. The east and west pediments celebrate Athena's glory, but the north may have told a story she wanted forgotten. Her debt to older gods, her violent past, or a prophecy even the goddess of wisdom feared to remember. The phantom pediment's absence leaves a gap in the Parthenon's cosmic balance where dawn and dusk are accounted for, but midnight goes unspoken. Perhaps that was always the point. Some secrets aren't meant to be set in stone. They linger in the empty space between columns, in the weight of missing marble, waiting for someone to piece together the echoes of what once was. From the entosses of the Parthenon's columns to the hallucinogenic vapors beneath Delphi, these 25 hidden meanings reveal a truth that reshapes how we see ancient Greek temples. They weren't just places of worship, but living encyclopedias carved in stone. Each curve, each alignment, each seemingly decorative flourish was a deliberate stroke in a grand intellectual and spiritual blueprint. The Greeks didn't merely build structures, they encoded their understanding of mathematics, astronomy, politics, and even human psychology into every block. The temples whispered to initiates through labyrinthine corridors, sang to worshippers with wind-chimed bronze, and painted prophecies in shifting shadows. They were theaters of light and sound, where God spoke through geological fissures and statues came alive under solstice sunbeams. Consider how these layered messages functioned like a language without words. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus taught celestial mechanics through its alignment with lunar standstills, while the Erechtheion's chaotic asymmetry narrated Athens' divine origin story in 3 dimensions. Even the paint now faded to ghostly traces once transformed temples into pulsating storyboards, where pigments carried the weight of myth and magnetite-infused tiles trembled with sacred energy. These weren't passive backdrops for ritual, they were interactive guides demanding engagement from those who sought deeper truths. What's thrilling is how many of these secrets were hiding in plain sight. The Samothrace sanctuary's underground chambers didn't just host rituals, they engineered disorientation to mimic the soul's journey. The Parthenon's golden ratio wasn't just aesthetic, it was a theological argument asserting that beauty and divinity shared a mathematical backbone. Even something as mundane as a temple's gutter spout could double as a symbolic quenching trough for Hephaestus's forge, turning rainwater into sacred metaphor. This multidimensional approach invites us to rethink ancient Greek genius. Their architects weren't just builders, but polymaths, masters of optics, acoustics, geology, and psychology. They knew how sunlight at a particular angle could make marble seem to breathe, how a whispering gallery could make a priest's voice feel omnipresent, how the very act of climbing uneven stairs could prepare a mind for revelation. Every choice was a calculated dialogue between human perception and divine intention. So the next time you stand before these ruins, don't just see broken columns and worn reliefs. Look for the grooves where sacrificial blood once channeled, the spots where solstice light still strikes with mathematical precision, the hollows where whispering priests conjured voices of gods. These temples are books with stone pages waiting to be read anew, and perhaps that's the final lesson: great architecture never truly dies. It simply waits for us to learn its language. Now it's your turn. Have you spotted hidden meanings we haven't covered? Felt the echo of something uncanny walking through these sacred spaces? Share your theories below, and if you visit, go slowly. Let the stones speak, because after 25 centuries, they're still telling their stories. All we have to do is listen.